I thought the look my husband gave his father's new wife was hatred, until I saw him pin her down on the basement floor. That was when I realized it had never been hatred. It was jealousy. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, let me know your country in the comments below. And if this is your first time on my channel, please hit follow and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of my stories. On stage, the bride and groom embraced each other amid a round of congratulatory applause. But I sat below, feeling like I was burning alive in a chair wrapped in fiery red velvet. The gentle-looking man, with the groom's boutonniere pinned to his chest, was my father-in-law, Mr. Reginald Vanderbilt, age 58. And the bride, Laura, was only 1 year older than my husband, Wyatt. He used to swear loyalty to his late wife, my mother-in-law, and yet here he was, playing the sugar daddy role, pampering his new wife with a wedding far more extravagant than the one Wyatt and I had. I glanced at Wyatt. His face was dark, eyes locked on Laura with the kind of stare that could devour her whole. Looking at him in that moment, I couldn't help but feel sorry. Who could stay calm when your widowed father suddenly marries a girl your age and hosts a wedding more lavish than your own? The ballroom at the Waldorf Astoria shimmered with chandelier light, the clinking of wine glasses blending with the low murmurs of powerful business people. Wyatt clenched his hands under the table, veins popping like he was holding back a storm. His face, usually composed in boardroom meetings, was now stiff, eyes bloodshot. I gently touched his shoulder and whispered, "Careful! Don't lose it." Today's guests were people of serious influence. A single raised eyebrow from them could send the Vanderbilt stock price plummeting. We couldn't afford anyone's ridicule. I forced myself to wear a strained smile, my lips stiff like they'd been glued in place. My father-in-law stood proudly on stage, silver-haired, his tailored suit impeccable, hugging Laura in her pearl-studded bridal gown. She beamed, her eyes scanning the room like she had just claimed ownership of the entire Vanderbilt empire. I remembered the times Mr. Reginald would speak of his late wife. No one can ever replace Margaret. And yet here he was now, calling Laura the love of my life, in front of 100 guests. Just when it seemed this awkward gathering was about to end and people began standing up to leave, a waiter suddenly wheeled 2 velvet chairs onto the stage. The entire ballroom murmured, curious eyes turning toward us. My father-in-law held the microphone, his voice deep and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, please bear witness. I invite my son, Wyatt, and my daughter-in-law to the stage for a united family portrait with me and Laura. From this day forward, Laura is officially a member of the Vanderbilt family." What? A family photo? I had taken my wedding photo with a framed picture of my mother-in-law, standing beside Mr. Reginald, who at the time was still teary-eyed, speaking of eternal love. Wyatt gripped my hand. "What the hell are they doing?" he growled, his voice shaking with rage. I looked around. The powerful faces were waiting, watching our reaction. Refuse? Tomorrow's Page 6 headline would scream, "Vanderbilt air sabotages father's wedding, family torn apart." The company's stock, already fragile due to rumors of this wedding, would tank. But if we went on stage, we'd be a joke. I swallowed hard, weighing the damage. "Go," I whispered. "Just once." Save face, Wyatt nodded, but his eyes looked like they could set the entire ballroom on fire. We walked up the stage, each step feeling like a weight tied to our ankles. Laura stood there in her dazzling gown, her perfect smile like it had been rehearsed in the mirror. She pulled out 2 Tiffany money clips from her clutch, engraved with our names, mine and Wyatt's, and handed them over like gifts. I took the clip. My fingers were ice cold. This wasn't some impulsive act by my father-in-law. This was a performance, carefully choreographed, and I'd bet Laura was the one who wrote the script. Clearly, I had underestimated her scheming. When it was all over, Wyatt and I swallowed our fury and quietly exited the ballroom. Back at the Park Avenue apartment, Wyatt exploded the moment he stepped through the door. He punched the living room wall, the dry, violent thud shaking the bookshelf. The brand new iPhone on the table was hurled to the floor, shattering into pieces. Its screen cracked like a spider web. Not stopping there, he stormed into the garage, gripping a baseball bat, and swung it repeatedly at the Tesla, each strike a cry of pent-up rage. Glass shards from the headlights scattered in all directions. I stood in the garage doorway, not stopping him. I let him vent. Maria, our housekeeper, peeked out from the kitchen corner, her face pale, too afraid to come closer. When Wyatt finally stopped, panting heavily, I saw blood dripping from his hand. A shard of glass had sliced across the back. I fetched the first aid kit from the kitchen cabinet, knelt beside him, and gently disinfected the wound. "What's the point of this, Wyatt?" I said, my voice calm but firm. "It's already come to this. You're only hurting yourself. If your father finds out, things will only get worse." He looked up, eyes glossy with tears, the face of a man who once led an entire corporation, now fragile like a child's. "I can't accept this, Peyton," he whispered, his voice cracking. The man who once loved his late wife so deeply was now marrying a girl young enough to be his daughter, and forcing his son to call her Mom in front of everyone. I paused the bandaging, meeting his eyes. Laura may have just married my father-in-law, but the way she manipulated him, the way she turned Reginald into a blindly smitten fool, it sent chills down my spine. Who would have thought a man like him, who built an empire from the ground up, could betray his own son just for a pretty face? I gently patted Wyatt's back, feeling his body tremble under my hand. "She's not worth destroying yourself over," I said, trying to keep my voice soft. He leaned his head on my shoulder, and we sat there, on the cold leather sofa, in a rare silence between us in this marriage of convenience. For the first time, I felt a flicker of real warmth between husband and wife, even though there was never love between us, only benefit. 4 years ago, I married Wyatt to secure my family's position in New York's financial elite. He married me to please his parents. We were two chess pieces on the Vanderbilt board, moving by strategy, not emotion. But now, Laura Delaney had entered the game, a shared enemy threatening both our interests. She didn't just want Reginald's heart. She wanted the legacy that belonged to my late mother-in-law. I looked up at Wyatt. "We can't stay silent," I said, my voice steady as steel. "We have to find a way to fight her." My words breathed air into the dying flame inside him. Wyatt sat upright, the sorrow in his eyes replaced by a flash of resolve. "You're right," he said through gritted teeth, his voice filled with grim intent. "I have to get rid of her." I flinched, heart racing. "No, Wyatt." I quickly grabbed his arm. "If you do anything reckless and something happens to her, you'll be the first suspect." After all, we were still husband and wife. If he went down, I couldn't just stand by. Wyatt stopped, exhaled sharply, his hand dropping like he'd just released a weight. "Then what am I supposed to do, Peyton?" he asked, his voice helpless. I stared straight into his eyes, my mind racing. "Your father is the one with the power," I said. "All we need is for him to shift his favor back to us, and Laura Delaney will no longer be a threat." Wyatt nodded, his eyes lighting up like he'd found an exit. From that moment, he began to change. Each week, he spent time with Reginald, playing golf, sharing dinners, talking like the rift never happened. With Laura, he smiled kindly. On the surface, everyone believed the Vanderbilt family had found peace. But then one day, I started to realize Laura wasn't just interested in my father-in-law. She had her eyes on both Wyatt and me, especially Wyatt. During dinner at the Hamptons estate, Wyatt, wearing a light blue linen shirt, gently picked up a bright red lobster tail and held it toward me. "Honey, open your mouth," he said in his warm, deep voice, his eyes glinting with a rare playfulness. I shyly bit into the lobster, the sweet and salty flavor melting on my tongue, but suddenly felt a gaze watching me. It wasn't my father-in-law. Mr. Reginald was smiling kindly at us, his wrinkled face lit with warmth. I turned to Wyatt, playfully pouting. "I want more," I said, but my eyes scanned the dinner table, searching for the source of my unease. Finally, my gaze landed on Laura. She was seated across from us, wearing a form-fitting white silk dress, her golden blonde hair shimmering under the lights. Her eyes were locked on Wyatt's fingers, following the curve of the silver chopsticks he held, then drifting upward, until they met mine. The moment our eyes connected, she quickly looked down, pretending to swirl her wineglass, but I had already seen it. After dinner, I told Wyatt about Laura's behavior. He only laughed. I frowned. "Don't you think she's acting strange?" I noticed lately that whenever Wyatt handed me water or swam with me, Laura would subtly watch us. He grew impatient. Suddenly, he pulled me into his arms and cut me off with a deep kiss, his lips warm and firm, smothering all my doubts. "Don't worry, maybe she's just keeping an eye on us," he whispered, his breath tickling my ear. I nodded, setting aside the unease. It was late by the time dinner ended, and my father-in-law asked us to stay overnight. Wyatt, who rarely agreed to sleep over at the Hamptons, nodded this time. In the middle of the night, in the estate's guest bedroom, Wyatt rolled over on the king-size bed, teasing me. I tried to muffle the sound. "Keep it down. Dad's room is next door." His fingers brushed my shoulder, his voice mischievous. "These walls are soundproof." The old man's asleep. No one can hear a thing. Then he picked up the pace, that devilish grin flashing in the dark. I couldn't resist, my hand running down his solid arm, my mind full of him. Handsome, well-born, strong, and lately treating me more gently than ever. In that moment, I thought maybe we could let our guard down and live like a real married couple. Have some kids, build a happy family. But then, a sharp sound cut through my thoughts. Like glass shattering just outside the door. I flinched. "Who's there?" I called. Wyatt jumped up and opened the door, but no one was there. "Probably a cat," he said casually, climbing back into bed. "Dad likes feeding the strays around here. One of them must have gotten in, but I didn't buy it. No cat would know how to clean up broken glass and wipe the floor without leaving a trace of water on the wall." At dawn, I got up to check. In the trash can, no shards of glass. The housekeeper, Maria, shook her head when I asked. "One glass is missing from the cupboard, ma'am," she said hesitantly. "But I didn't see any pieces." I frowned. Everyone knew Laura had a habit of drinking cold water in the middle of the night. Of course it was her. I never imagined Laura wasn't just spying on us in daylight, but even our private moments in bed she wanted to eavesdrop on. My rage surged, but before I could rush back to tell Wyatt, I passed by the kitchen and froze. The Filipino private chef was discreetly dumping something into the trash. Looking closer, I saw in her hand were the NAD plus booster smoothies I had brought for my father-in-law, the gift Wyatt had carefully selected to help improve his health. "Why are you throwing those out?" I snapped, my voice trembling with fury. Rosa jumped, her hands shaking. "Mrs. Vanderbilt told me to, ma'am." She said those drinks weren't suitable for Mr. Reginald. "Not suitable? What about the previous cans I brought?" I asked, my voice rising uncontrollably. "All thrown away," Rosa mumbled, eyes fixed on the floor. I stood there, blood rushing to my head. Wyatt had put in so much effort to pick that gift, and Laura tossed it all without hesitation, like wiping away his sincerity. But what made my skin crawl was what Rosa said next. Mrs. Vanderbilt ordered a different brand from another clinic. I stood frozen. Laura didn't just throw our gifts away. She replaced them with the exact brand Wyatt liked. The one he always drank when we came to the Hamptons. The one tied to his childhood memories. My heart clenched like it had been squeezed. All the puzzle pieces began to snap into place. Laura wasn't targeting me. She was after Wyatt. She didn't just want Reginald's heart or the Vanderbilt empire. Laura wanted his. The situation was so insane that I had no choice but to handle it myself. I didn't dare tell Wyatt about my suspicions. He already despised Laura, and if he knew she was targeting him, I feared he would explode and destroy what was left of his relationship with his father. I couldn't tell my father-in-law, Reginald, either. Laura was too clever, always playing the role of the perfect wife. If I accused her, she could twist the narrative and make me the villain in his eyes. After many sleepless nights, I decided to act. I called a private investigator who had worked for my parents before. After a month of surveillance, I was more certain than ever. Laura did have intentions toward Wyatt, but it wasn't enough. "Find more," I told the detective over the phone. "I need something undeniable." Finally, the detective found something useful. A short video clip. Laura, wearing a tight red dress, walking into a private room with a man. I recognized him instantly. Trey Davenport, the notorious rich playboy of New York's high society, and Wyatt's childhood best friend. When they came out, Laura's face was flushed, her hair slightly messy, her eyes shyly glancing at Trey while he smirked triumphantly, his hand brushing her lower back. I sat frozen in front of the laptop screen. Was Laura cheating to soothe her loneliness? Or did she purposely get close to Trey to dig for information about Wyatt? It didn't matter. All I needed was to edit this file and deliver it to my father-in-law. Reginald would never forgive her. I smiled, feeling relieved for the first time in weeks, and drifted off to sleep. But then, the shrill ringtone tore through the night, yanking me from my dreams. "What?" I gasped, my voice cracking, my face turning pale as I heard the news on the other end. My father-in-law, Reginald, always strong like a warhorse, had suddenly suffered a massive heart attack and passed away. I collapsed into a chair, hands trembling around my phone. His death came too suddenly, right before I planned to expose Laura. The timing was so perfect, so chilling. This wasn't a coincidence. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. At the memorial service at St. Patrick's Cathedral, the air was heavy. Light from the stained glass spread across the marble floor in streaks of red and blue, like blood and tears. Laura stood there in dark sunglasses, clutching Reginald's urn, sobbing dramatically. Her cries echoed through the silence, but I stood in a corner, lips pressed tightly together. She had only been in the Vanderbilt family for a few months, and now he, the pillar of this entire family, was gone. Wyatt stood beside me, veins bulging on his temple, his fist clenched so tight, his knuckles turned white. I knew that if I voiced my suspicions, he would lose control. He could lunge at Laura right in the middle of the church, and because Reginald always valued reputation above all things, I decided to stay silent and handle this quietly after the funeral. When the last guest left, I searched for Wyatt everywhere. He disappeared the moment the first guest stepped out, without saying a word. I walked through the long corridors. On the first floor, a faint noise from the basement made me stop, like fabric rustling, followed by a quick breath. I followed the sound, descending the dark stairs, each step dragging me closer to a horrifying truth. Through the slight gap of the basement door, I saw a corner of a black dress, a man's leg pressed against a woman's knee. I held my breath, my heart slamming against my ribs. It was Laura. She dared to cheat on the day of his father's funeral? I reached for the door, but the man's voice made me freeze. "No one can stop us anymore. You can only belong to me." That voice, low and possessive, came from Wyatt, my husband. I stood there, blood turning to ice, my breath clogged in my chest. Laura whispered something, too soft for me to hear, but Wyatt replied, his tone cold as a blade. "I'll take care of Peyton Sinclair." "She won't be able to stand in our way, Peyton Sinclair." My name. They had been colluding all along. The death of my father-in-law, the perfect timing. It all came together like a completed puzzle. They weren't just having an affair. They were plotting, And I, the lawful wife, was their next target. Realizing the Hamptons estate was no longer safe, especially after catching Wyatt and Laura in the basement, his possessive voice, "No one can stop us anymore," kept echoing in my head like a curse. I couldn't stay. I packed my things in the middle of the night and drove to my parents' house. When I opened the door to their apartment, my mother, Eleanor Sinclair, was wearing a facial mask. "Why are you here?" she asked, surprised, her eyes narrowing beneath the sheet mask. "You should be with Wyatt." "He just lost his father. He must be devastated. Why would you leave him alone?" I stood there, my hand gripping the handle of my suitcase, my lips pressed so tightly I couldn't say a word. My mother, a woman who could see through any secret, immediately sensed something was wrong. She ripped off her mask and threw it onto the table. "Did something happen with Wyatt?" she asked, her voice dropping. "Is he seeing someone else?" I took a deep breath, feeling like the air was caught in my chest. I couldn't lie to my mother, not to Eleanor, the woman who had exposed every lie in New York's high society. "Wyatt and Laura are having an affair," I said. "I suspect my father-in-law's death is somehow connected to them, and their next target is me." My mother froze, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. She didn't say a word. She grabbed her phone and immediately called my father. I sat down on the sofa, my eyes staring blankly out the window. While she made the call, I opened my laptop and pulled up the file the detective had sent on Laura. I had only known that Laura and Wyatt went to the same university. She was 1 year ahead of him, different majors. But now, rereading every line, every photo, I started to notice the details I had missed. First, their lecture halls were always close, only separated by one hallway. Second, Wyatt had been a campus star, his face all over the student forums. I found an old post, faded but clear. Wyatt, in his varsity jacket, standing in front of the library, openly courting a girl. The girl looked younger, but I could still recognize her. It was Laura. My heart tightened. No wonder, at the wedding, Wyatt stared at Laura so fiercely. That wasn't hatred. It was jealousy. He was angry that his father married the woman he once loved. Or perhaps something darker. Maybe they had been conspiring together all along, planning to seize control of the Vanderbilt legacy. I remembered when my father-in-law and Laura went on their honeymoon to Napa Valley. Wyatt had grown restless the moment he found out, insisting on going there too. "It's just a business trip," he said back then, voice cold, eyes avoiding mine. I had stopped him and snapped, "What a coincidence! Dad leaves, and suddenly you want to go too? Stay at the same resort, visit the same winery, and just bump into them by chance? Who do you think you're fooling? Don't even try me." At the time, I thought he was tracking Laura out of spite, out of anger that his father had remarried. But now I saw it clearly. He wasn't angry. He was jealous. Jealous of his own father. I clenched the computer mouse. I had almost believed Wyatt. I almost thought that in those tender moments at the Hamptons, when he was being sweet to me, when he teased me in bed, we could become a real couple. I had let sympathy blur my judgment, even schemed with him to take Laura down. But he had always been lying, using me, treating me like a pawn in his twisted game. Fine. If he dared to use me, then I'd make him pay for it. The door burst open. My father, Jonathan Sinclair, stormed in, his face flushed red, about to erupt. He didn't even take off his coat before unleashing a torrent of fury. "That shameless old man. I warned him when he said he wanted to remarry. At his age, what young woman could truly love him? I thought she was just after some money, but no. He brought a damn wolf into the house." He paused to catch his breath, then turned to me, his eyes blazing. "And Wyatt, that heartless bastard. For a woman, he'd take out his own father. You have to divorce him, Peyton. You must divorce him." His voice echoed through the apartment, like gunfire tearing through the silence. I wanted to calm him down, but his words came so fast I couldn't get a word in. My mother, seated on the velvet blue armchair, lifted her hand gently, a small but commanding gesture that signaled him to stop. Jonathan exhaled heavily, slumping onto the couch beside her, the cushions sinking under his weight. He looked up at me, waiting for me to speak, and in his eyes, I saw not only anger, but hurt. I took a deep breath, the air catching in my chest. "I'm not planning to divorce just yet," I said. "My father-in-law's assets haven't been distributed. The partnership contract with Vanderbilt Enterprises is still pending. I'll wait until it's all settled. Then I'll file for divorce." My mother looked at me, her gaze softening, touched by guilt and concern. My father gripped her hand tightly, as if trying to contain his rage. I knew what they were thinking, that even though the marriage was my choice, some part of the blame still fell on them. But that wasn't true. 4 years ago, when Sinclair Holdings was on the brink of collapse due to a supply chain crisis, I entered this game of my own free will. Containers piled up at the ports, contracts canceled, penalty fees hanging over the company like a blade at its throat. My parents were losing sleep from the stress, but never, not once, did they consider using me as leverage for survival. But I, Peyton Sinclair, could not stand by and watch their life's work fall apart. When my father talked about selling everything to scrape together the money, I was the one who proposed the business marriage to Wyatt Vanderbilt, head of the tech supply chain and the key to saving Sinclair Holdings. I negotiated, I gave up leverage, and I succeeded. The shipments were delivered on time, and the company was saved. I never blamed my parents, not even once. "Don't worry," I said, stepping forward to wrap my arms around them, feeling their warmth. "Your daughter isn't a fool. And she's not blinded by love." The lines on their faces slowly softened, but inside me, the fire of hatred for Wyatt burned hotter than ever, an inferno I couldn't extinguish. He had deceived me, used me to cover up his affair with Laura. Secrets don't stay buried forever. I promised myself that. As long as I watched his every move, every gesture, I would find proof of his betrayal. Wyatt, this man who could betray his own father for a mistress, would pay. If I didn't bring him down, I knew I'd be the next one to fall. The next day, my parents drove me back to the Vanderbilt Hamptons estate. After all, I was still Wyatt's wife on paper, and I had to return to maintain appearances before high society. My parents insisted on staying with me, their eyes wary. "Crowds make it easier for things to happen," my mother whispered, clutching her Hermes handbag tightly. "We can't let Wyatt pull anything on you." They decided to stay until the lawyer read the will. Over the next 2 days, my father shadowed Wyatt. My mother stuck close to me. On the day the will was revealed, the living room of the estate was thick with tension. The lawyer, a frail man in a gray suit, read each line in a flat voice. "All of Mr. Reginald Vanderbilt's estate shall be passed on to his son, Wyatt Vanderbilt." Not a single mention of Laura Delaney. The room erupted in murmurs, eyes turning toward Laura, who was standing in the corner. Suddenly, she clutched her mouth, collapsed to the floor, dry heaving, her messy blonde hair falling over her face. The crowd buzzed, whispers flying. Could she be pregnant? If there's a baby, the inheritance might need to be divided. That's a Vanderbilt heir. But at Reginald's age? Who even knows if the child is his? I stood there, eyes locked on Laura. Pregnant? If the baby was Wyatt's, I'd have the perfect leverage against him. A love child, a new wife, an unborn heir. Just thinking about it was enough to spark a high society scandal worthy of the tabloids. Wyatt stood a few feet away, his face blank, eyes hollow, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Maybe the baby wasn't his, or maybe he was acting. The reading of the will ended, leaving Wyatt pale and shaken. I was ready to leave, to return to my parents' home where I could watch and plan safely. But with things like this, Laura possibly pregnant, Wyatt unstable, I knew I had to stay in the Hamptons. That night, Wyatt exploded again. The sound of shattering filled the study, a porcelain vase, a silver picture frame, all smashed in his fury. Then he grabbed his keys and stormed into the garage, The Porsche engine roaring like a wild animal. I didn't need to guess. He was going to find Laura. I stood by the window, watching the taillights disappear into the night, feeling like my heart was being dragged along with them. After a long day, all I wanted was to sleep, to let the night wash away the exhaustion. But the next morning, Wyatt returned, his energy completely different. He walked in with a glint of smugness I had never seen in him before. I called the detective immediately. "Is the baby his?" I asked, my voice trembling with hope. "Laura's not pregnant," he replied. I hung up, disappointment rising in my throat. Not pregnant? Then why did Laura put on that performance in front of everyone? To mislead me? That didn't make sense. No pregnancy was good news for Wyatt, so why had he been so angry? What were they scheming? The question drilled into my head like a relentless auger. I decided to act. I invited Laura to come stay with me. "You're carrying my father's child, after all," I said. "Why don't you come stay with us for a while? Living together would make it easier to look after one another." She blinked, then smiled that perfect smile. She had always avoided me, kept her distance. But this time she nodded immediately, packed her things, and moved into my penthouse the very same day. Too fast. Too easy. She knew I'd caught on to something. This wasn't surrender. This was a bold move. But what she didn't know was that this penthouse was my domain. Every corner, every hidden camera was under my control. The first night Laura moved into my home, Wyatt, who hadn't touched me in a long time, suddenly lunged onto the bed, his body heavy against mine under the white silk sheets. But in my mind, everything was crystal clear. Every time he'd been intimate with me before, including tonight, had all been part of a performance he was staging for Laura to see, to provoke her, to spark jealousy. Anger surged through me, and I gathered all my strength to slam my knee into his lower abdomen. Wyatt let out a painful scream, rolling on the bed in agony, clutching his stomach, his face contorted. "Honey! I didn't mean to!" I cried, feigning panic as I rushed to hold him. "Are you okay?" I quickly called the family doctor. Fortunately, it wasn't serious, just needed a few days of rest. But what shocked me was how utterly indifferent Laura was to Wyatt's condition. That night, while the entire house was lit up by the commotion, her room remained silent, not a sound. When the doctor left, she didn't ask a single question, simply stood by the kitchen door, her eyes sweeping coldly across the scene as if it had nothing to do with her. Something wasn't right. Maybe I had miscalculated. From that point on, Laura stopped paying attention to Wyatt, but she began watching me instead. Early in the morning, during my runs, I'd hear the light steps behind me. It was Laura, in a tight sports outfit, keeping her distance but never looking away. When I went to Whole Foods, she insisted on tagging along, her eyes furtively following my every move. This constant shadowing began to wear on me, and after a week, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted her. "Tell me, what exactly are you trying to—" I didn't even finish the question when Laura stepped forward and grabbed my hand tightly. Her face was stricken with fear and sorrow, her voice trembling as she pleaded, "Sinclair, please help me." She sobbed, "Wyatt won't leave me alone. He keeps pressuring me to have his child. He's the one who killed his own father." I looked down at her crumpled form, but not with pity, only with suspicion. "Stop pretending," I said. "I already know about you and Wyatt back in college. I'm willing to divorce him, but only if you convince him to give me half of the estate." It wasn't a bad idea. I needed money, she'd get to be with the man she supposedly loved, and we'd both win. The families had already ended their partnership. Vanderbilt Enterprises had been inherited. I had nothing to lose, even if they found out. But Laura shook her head, her voice breaking. "Sinclair, there was never anything between me and Wyatt. He used my family to threaten me, kept me from leaving the Vanderbilt house," she explained, voice shaking. "Back in college, he did chase after me, but I didn't like him. After he went abroad, we lost touch. I didn't even know he was Reginald's son until the day before the wedding." Her words made sense, but I still had questions. My voice dropped. Then why fake a pregnancy? Ever since she moved in, she'd clutched her stomach, dry heaved, and let people assume she was expecting. Wyatt hadn't exposed her, and she stayed silent. Laura's eyes widened in shock, her face pale. How did you know? I replied flatly. Wyatt took your blood and had it tested without your consent. She collapsed to the floor, terrified. I just wanted him to be cautious, to think I was carrying his father's child so he'd leave me alone. A dark thought flashed through my mind. Everyone thought Laura was pregnant, and Wyatt never corrected them. If she gave birth, everyone would assume the child was Reginald's. Wyatt could then take care of them under the guise of a grieving son and concerned brother, and no one would suspect a thing. A perfect plan, so logical it made Laura's breakdown feel too real to be fake. I needed to confirm the truth. I couldn't afford to be fooled again. They could bribe classmates, professors, but not enemies. That's what I told myself before taking action. I drove to a small cafe in Brooklyn, specifically to meet the one person who hated Laura the most. A woman who had gone to college with her, now sitting in the corner of the cafe, her face brimming with resentment. Eyes narrowed the moment I mentioned Laura's name. I pulled a $10,000 check from my purse and gently slid it across the table. Wyatt chased her for 6 months and still got nowhere, the woman said, her voice full of scorn. She avoided him every day, scared of him, said he was obsessive and frightening. She's a fraud. And now she's married some old man. What? For love? Please. She did it for money. Her words landed like a confirmation. Laura wasn't lying. Wyatt had coerced her, turned infatuation into terror. Halfway through the conversation, my phone buzzed. My assistant's voice came through. Peyton, Mr. Vanderbilt is about to be discharged. My chest seized up. Laura was still at the penthouse, and if she was alone with Wyatt, it could be dangerous. I called her immediately, my voice tight with urgency. Wyatt's on his way back. On the other end, Laura's voice trembled in panic, her words a mess. What do I do? He won't spare me. I forced myself to stay calm. Fake stomach pain. Drive to Central Hospital now. I've arranged someone to meet you there. I'll be home in 2 hours. She paused for a second, then whispered, Thank you. I hung up, my fingers shaking around the steering wheel. After I got back from Brooklyn, the housekeeper at the penthouse sent me a message. Peyton, Mr. Davenport is visiting. He's in the living room. Mr. Wyatt told us to stay away, the living room? That's where I had my hidden cameras. Tiny ones tucked into bookshelves and chandeliers. I needed to hear what those two snakes were plotting. I opened the surveillance app on my phone, the footage crystal clear. Wyatt was sitting on the sofa, still pale from his injury, whiskey glass in hand. Trey Davenport stood by the window in a light gray suit, flashing that smug half-smile. Wyatt, Peyton did this to you. Has she found out about you and Laura? Trey asked in a low voice, twirling his ring. Wyatt sneered, his mouth twisted, a glint of cruelty in his eyes. No way! I've been careful, barely meet Laura in private. That Sinclair girl hasn't caught on. Trey frowned, stepped closer. Maybe you should move Laura somewhere else. If this gets out, it'll be a mess, Wyatt shrugged, his tone cool but calculating. Relax. Even if it does, I'll handle it. Laura's technically my father's widow. No one would suspect a thing. Trey's voice dropped, warning, What about Peyton? You planning to keep this up forever? The Sinclair family doesn't mess around. Wyatt laughed, loud and echoing, the whiskey swirling in his hand. I'm not divorcing her. I want both Peyton and Laura to give me a child. Childbirth walks the edge of life and death. With a little manipulation, Peyton could die on that table. I sat frozen in my car, gripping the phone, staring at his face on the screen. His eyes slitted, full of calculation. Wyatt continued, enunciating each word. If she dies, the child would still carry the Sinclair bloodline. Then both the Sinclair and Vanderbilt empires would be mine. It wasn't enough to kill me. He wanted my parents to hand over their legacy to the child of a murderer. Evil. But he miscalculated. I never intended to have his child. At first, I only planned to strip him of everything, but now, I want him gone. Forever. Act 10. I rolled the car window down slightly, letting the cold air rush in to help me stay alert. The original plan was to expose the twisted relationship between Wyatt and Laura, trigger a scandal that would crash the stock price, and then start to intervene. But now that I knew Laura wasn't a willing participant, that she'd been forced by Wyatt, I had a change of heart. Making it public would only lead to her being shamed and destroyed by society, and she didn't deserve that. I clenched my fists, thinking through the next steps. To take Wyatt down, Laura would be the key piece. She would have to follow my instructions, become the tool I used to dismantle him from within. When I slipped away from those watching me and met Laura, telling her I'd help her, the sadness on her face vanished instantly, her eyes lighting up like she had just seen a lifeline. Of course, I had conditions. She would have to obey everything I said. I sat down across from her. I want you to tell me in detail how he caused Reginald's death, I said. Laura swallowed hard, her voice shaking. There was something wrong with the NAD plus booster smoothies. They had a compound that reacted badly with the medication Reginald was taking, so I usually dumped them out. Then he found out and yelled at me. He had the attack not long after drinking one, I frowned. Then why didn't you go to the police? Laura stared ahead, like she was trying to recall something painful. Before he died, Reginald begged me not to go to the police. It was his dying wish. He also said he felt guilty about his son. In the end, I came up with a plan. She would pretend to side with Wyatt, and just when he thought he had it all, we'd reveal his father's last words. Laura began playing along. She no longer resisted Wyatt, let him hold her hand and wrap an arm around her in the hallways, but went no further. I promised her protection, so every time Wyatt pushed too far, I conveniently showed up and interrupted. Since I pretended not to know anything, and his beloved Laura was gradually warming up to him, plus my father handed over a project to Vanderbilt Enterprises, Wyatt acted like he had hit the jackpot. His face beamed like a king who had conquered a kingdom. But the fun was over. It was time to let him know what his father had truly said before dying. That morning, he was still grinning, laughing out loud while reading the financial papers. But by afternoon, after Laura whispered Reginald's final wish into his ear, Wyatt locked himself in his bedroom. I knocked on the door, feigning concern. "Honey, are you okay?" No reply. Only the crashing sounds of glass shattering, cups, picture frames, all broken in his fit of rage. No wonder Laura hated him. Every time he got angry, he'd destroy things like a wild animal out of control. I knocked again. "Honey, Trey came by. Aren't you going to see him?" A scream burst from inside the room. "Get out! All of you get out! I don't want to see anyone today." Not even his best friend. He had definitely broken down. Wyatt had always believed his father's death was a coincidence, giving him the freedom to pursue Laura. But now, realizing his father died because of him, and that his father had kept it quiet to protect him, his mind was unraveling. This was the moment. I told Laura to pretend to go shopping. She nodded, holding her Gucci purse as she stepped out the door. I arranged for someone to take her to the airport with a new passport, a new name, and new identity. She flew straight out of the country. Once Wyatt regained clarity, he went mad searching for Laura. He stormed up to me, eyes filled with rage. "What did you do to her?" I looked surprised. "What? You said I couldn't lay a finger on her, didn't you?" He growled. "If it wasn't you, I'm calling the police." I smiled. "Do it." He hesitated, but I dialed the police myself. After an investigation, Wyatt found out Laura had gone abroad. Airport footage showed her traveling alone, not under duress, her face calm as she scanned her passport. And most importantly, she wasn't missing. She simply left. I murmured, pretending to panic. What if she ran away to have a baby overseas and comes back to claim the inheritance? What about her parents? Are they still here? Before I even finished, He grabbed his phone and ran into his study. The hidden camera in that room caught everything. It recorded the address of Laura's parents. The moment I had it, I sent it to my assistant. That same day, her parents were relocated and disappeared from New York. Wyatt fell into a pit of despair, losing both his lover and the last of her family. I was ready to strike at the Vanderbilt fortune, one stock, one contract at a time. But then, something unexpected happened. Laura called Wyatt from abroad. She sobbed, saying she'd been deceived overseas, and she refused to let him send anyone to retrieve her. She was terrified. Less than 30 minutes after the call ended, Wyatt packed his suitcase and left. 3 days later, he hadn't returned. But the news made headlines. Chairman of Vanderbilt Enterprises killed abroad after being caught in gang crossfire. Died on the spot due to severe blood loss from multiple gunshot wounds. Just a few months after my father-in-law's funeral, I was once again standing there, hosting another memorial service beneath the familiar vaulted ceilings of St. Patrick's Cathedral. I smoothly thanked the mourners for coming, my voice warm but steady, my hands gently gripping a bouquet of white lilies, the flower of purity and rebirth, as I bowed before the familiar faces of high society, their gazes laced with both sympathy and curiosity. Because Wyatt had left no will, by law, I, Peyton Sinclair, his legal wife, was entitled to all his shares, real estate, investments, company assets, and every last dollar he left behind. Just like that, I inherited everything Wyatt once owned: the skyscrapers, the Vanderbilt Enterprises stock, the massive investment portfolios, the empire he built. I smiled quietly to myself, silently thanking my late husband for refusing to divorce me, for leaving me this entire inheritance, like a surprise gift born from his own greed. After the service, I asked my mother to transfer a large sum to Laura, enough for her to start over. With that massive fortune, I merged the two companies, Sinclair Holdings and Vanderbilt Enterprises, and the numbers dancing across my computer screen became a victory waltz, propelling me to the top of the local billionaire rankings, holding strong at number 1. Business boomed, contracts poured in, and men pursued me endlessly. Bouquets of blazing red roses delivered to my office, invitations to dinner dates. Among them, my ex-boyfriend, Noah Grant, appeared at my office one rainy afternoon, holding a bouquet of violet flowers, the same flower he once gave me years ago. "Peyton, my parents finally said yes," he stammered, eyes sparkling with hope. "I can marry you now." I gave a faint smile and rose from my chair. "Noah Grant, don't be ridiculous," I replied. "That was years ago." "When I was unmarried, your family looked down on me, refused to let us be together. Now that I'm a widow, your mother suddenly approves? I doubt I've suddenly become her type." "Ah, I see. It's my money, isn't it?" Noah's face flushed crimson as he stood frozen, the violet bouquet trembling in his hands like a symbol of the superficiality he once tried to hide. I turned and walked away, the click of my heels echoing across the hardwood floor, remembering how his family sneered at us back then, when my father was on the brink of bankruptcy, calling me the poor girl dreaming of marrying Wall Street royalty. Well, now I had the money. The poor girl had become the princess. On the way home, under a golden sunset that painted the sky in red, my phone buzzed softly in my purse. A message from Laura appeared. "I've found someone new." "Thank you for everything," I smiled, loosening my grip on the steering wheel as the wind blew through the open car window, carrying with it the breath of freedom, clearing out the last shadows that lingered. It was good that both of us had found new futures, she with true love somewhere far away, and me with an empire of my own, waking each morning in my sprawling penthouse, opening the windows to golden sunlight, brewing a cup of black coffee, and sitting by the wooden table overlooking a city that was just beginning to wake.